Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. My name is Andrew Claudio, aka GMAC. It is time to break down and preview another Knicks matchup, this time on Saturday night against the Sacramento Kings. They are not your father's Sacramento Kings. They're not even December's Sacramento Kings anymore. A team that looked like they were headed for Tanksville and the lottery and potentially a blockbuster trade has completely turned their season around with a head coaching change. I wonder if Knicks fans think that that's an appropriate thing. That's something that may come up throughout this podcast, but I'm excited to talk about the Kings. And look, I know I usually bring up baseball and it's not welcome here, but I'm wearing my Mets hat today because today's amazing day at Citi Field, and I didn't go because I wanted to be here with all of you previewing this game here on the Knicks Film School YouTube channel, which is only 800 subscribers shy of 20,000. So for my efforts and for all of our efforts, please go subscribe. But if you think this is bad, just wait until you see what my guest is wearing. Joining me from Sactown Sports 1140, Mr. Brenden Nunes, friend of the pod in his Red Sox hat. Brenden, welcome back to Knicks Film School, sir.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Andrew. I was explaining to you before we hopped on that I decided at the beginning of last year that I was going to wear whatever baseball hats I wanted because I just wanted more hat variety. I didn't watch much baseball. Except the Dodgers because NorCal, SoCal, gotta keep true to that.
Gotcha.
But then I got really back into the Giants. So that's where my loyalty lies, I guess you would say, but I'll wear anything. There is a Yankees hat back there somewhere. My boss, Frankie Cardicelli, is a big Yankees fan. We have a couple Yankee fans, including Kevin Herter, by the way.
That's right.
In Sacramento. So I get some crap every time I wear this for sure.
Kevin Herter's from upstate New York, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was very distraught at the Soto signing.
Oh,
that was mid-game for the Kings, and he found out at halftime. Yeah,
poor him. Yes, him.
Yeah.
Rolling Towns, Josh Hart. My sympathies your direction.
Of course.
And now you have a baseball team in Sacramento. I know you said you're a Giants fan though, so welcoming the A's to Sacramento probably isn't the key word to use, but.
Yeah, feel for especially as like a Bay Area guy originally. Feel for all local A's fans originally, but I'm slightly excited to have them right in my backyard.
There you go.
Get to see these guys up close and personal in a what's the wording they've been using? An intimate setting.
An intimate setting. Yeah. So minor league ballpark for a Major League Baseball team
Exactly.
will definitely be an intimate setting this upcoming season. Well, one thing that has become an intimate setting for sure seems to be, from my perspective, this turnaround that the Kings have had. And look, there's so many storylines to go to, and I can't get to all of them today, but like, the Kings are just an interesting team. Like they're a fascinating team. If you wanted to do, like, I'm sure in the podcast world for the Kings, there's so many different things you could talk about, whether it be the coaching change that happened, whether it be the integration of DeMar DeRozan into this offense, this high powered offense, the flourishing Domantas Sabonis, who just continues to put up numbers, yet there's still questions about his overall impact on winning. There's the De'Aaron Fox thing. I don't even know what else to say other than De'Aaron Fox thing, because it seemed as if he was headed toward being the next star to ask out. Now it's like, oh no, things are good now, and we're trending the other direction, like lifelong King as part of the solution. I'm just going to say it. We were paying close attention to Keon Ellis, and the fact that he wasn't playing made us think he might be available. And as a Knicks fan who is very much hoping that we get help for the second unit, so Tibbs will play the second unit, I was hoping that he'd be available. And now he also seems to be part of the solution. So everything I just mentioned, that it leads to like a vibe check with Kings fans. So you tell me, how are the vibes in Sacramento? Of all the things that stand out, what's been the biggest storyline? I mean, the coaching change obviously would probably be one, but did I summarize everything correctly, and did I miss anything?
No, I think that you're pretty accurate. That remind me our feel on language here, Andrew.
Oh,
we're good. It's been a crazy ass season from the Kings. That makes really no sense to me in a lot of ways. I thought that Mike Brown was, and Kings fans hate that I still talk about Mike Brown. You know how it is. Like, once we move on, we're moved on. But it's a reality of what was part of this season for sure. And I think that he was pushing them in the right direction, but he was a lot more focused on postseason success and eventual postseason success, even if that meant sacrificing some of the regular season. And I haven't shared this yet. Actually, I kind of just am workshopping this thought, I guess. It's almost like as if he was the Steve Kerr, but they skipped the Mark Jackson part.
Okay.
Not that I am advocating for a Mark Jackson. Do not get me wrong. Not a Mark Jackson fan. That was almost the case when Mike Brown was hired in the first place.
I remember that. Yeah.
That would have been the right decision or anything. But that feels like sort of the switch going on here, that Doug Christie came in and is just instilling confidence in all of these guys when Mike Brown was a little more Thibodeau. One of the biggest differences is how much they're practicing. Mike Brown will practice every single opportunity he got. And it's funny, like I'm sure you've seen Joakim Noah just shared that story about how when they landed in whatever city it was when he was on the Bulls overseas, and then they practiced right when they got there. Like that is also Mike Brown. And I think that some of the players didn't necessarily love that. Everything we've kind of gathered is that De'Aaron Fox was a big Mike Brown guy, that he actually advocated for Mike Brown to stick around this offseason because those contract negotiations with extending head coach weren't the smoothest. They were definitely conversations, and then De'Aaron advocates for him, and then they decide to move on from Mike Brown right after De'Aaron Fox kind of says, hey, what direction are we going in? So that's its own storyline that I think is very interesting, and I think a lot would have to be done to convince De'Aaron to stick around at this point. But Domantas Sabonis wasn't the biggest advocate for Mike Brown. I think the practicing somewhat had to do with that. Heard questions about how DeMar may feel about practicing all the time and things like that, you know, as a little bit of an older guy on this team. And then just little things of Keon Ellis not playing would be the biggest rotational difference that I thought was pretty weird. I think that is also Mike Brown he's worried more about the future than the present, I guess I would say, is that there was an aspect of he's trying to hold Keon accountable. He can maybe be a little bit too risky defensively at times, and Mike would have a really quick short leash with him. And to be honest, it probably wasn't really warranted, because then you're going to Kevin Huerter, who hasn't been very good this year. And I think Kevin Huerter is better than how he's been playing. It's just, I'm sure, a tough mental thing for him over these last couple years. After his first year here, he was just like a hero in Sacramento, part of that Beam team year that everybody loved. So big difference between Mike Brown and Doug Christie, I would say, is how much they're practicing, which I think, funnily enough, is really helping this team here. And funny to also say that on a pod where other teams coached by Tom Thibodeau. But then,
yeah. No, it's just the interesting thing. The interesting thing from what I'm hearing is, first of all, how reputations become a thing. Because yes, that was definitely Tibbs in Chicago. The Knicks never practice nowadays, is what I hear. And this is the benefit of doing a pod, not just Knicks Film School, but shout out to Katz and Shoot, but Fred Katz and James Edwards, the former beat writer for the Knicks, and obviously now the current beat writer for the Knicks for The Athletic. They're consistent about the reason all these Knicks minutes are through the roof is because they never practice. And my frustration has actually been that they don't, because they look like a team that hasn't practiced in weeks sometimes, and that Tibbs is his philosophy of like, I'm going to play you as many minutes as possible on the court in game, because I know you're going to have like nothing. You're just working on treatment. And they went and hired like one of the top doctors in the sport this offseason, because they're a team coached by Tom Thibodeau that's going to force them to play a ton of minutes. And like they played this game on Monday against the Hawks, and they had 2 days off beforehand. And I texted our Cats and Shoot group chat, like, oh my God, they look like a team that practiced. And like, you're right, they did. It's like, oh my gosh, what a difference a practice makes. So I think things have changed amidst past reputations, which I wonder with Mike Brown if that isn't a philosophy that changes for him, that his thought of like consistent practices for the long-term benefit, whereas Tibbs, that you absolutely nailed. He's like, the game in front of me is the one that matters right now. So that's the most fascinating thing. So I gather that Doug Christie doesn't practice as much, or what's the situation there now?
Yeah, definitely not as much. You're gonna see, there's a lot more off days, which I personally enjoy a little bit as well. I will say, not having to go to practice every
Right.
single. It was literally every opportunity that they possibly could have on their schedule. They were practicing,
Can I
and
ask it
to
real
your
quick? Can I
point,
ask a
they were
question?
playing the most minutes in the league. Some of these guys.
That's right. So I knew the Kings were up there with the Knicks because we were always pointing to them as like, see, it's not just us.
Yeah.
So where is the practice facility for the Kings?
It's on. It's connected to Golden One.
So it's like not that far a drive.
No, yeah, it's totally
Okay.
connected.
So there are Knicks fans that won't want to hear this, but the Knicks practice facility is technically outside New York City. It's like an hour to get there. It's in Tarrytown, upstate. And it's been a thing for years that fans don't want to hear that the practice facility and its location matters. And then you talk to people and they're like, no, it absolutely matters. Every Knick that lives here, like they hate that the practice facility is like an hour Uber or an hour drive away upstate. They have to leave New York City to get there, especially with New York City traffic. So I wanted to see how I'm actually very curious how other franchises, because beat writers complain about it too, reporters complain about it too.
Yeah, I'd complain about that too. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, like oh, I have to. It's literally downtown Manhattan is where the game is, but we have to, and we all want to live in the city, but we have to travel upstate to do it. So anyway, that's a side note. All right, so it sounds like. So you tell me that the substitute teacher taking over of it all, that doesn't seem to be what's happened here. It seems like they got someone that might be a part of the long-term solution in Doug Christie.
I would say there's a strong chance. I think the awkwardness here is also that Doug Christie was part of Luke Walton's staff, and then Mike Brown didn't really have the option of, is Doug Christie going to be on your staff? He was told Doug Christie's going to be on his staff. He's an organizational hire who we know has good relationships with ownership and some of the higher ups, which have a history in Sacramento with maybe being a little bit involved, as I'm sure people will remember. So that's where it was a little bit weird. Like it was pretty known among a lot of us that if Mike Brown loses this job, like Doug Christie is sitting in the wings waiting. You know, there was the story that came out of they fired Mike Brown on the way to the team plane. Doug Christie was the only one not on that team plane because he was already talking about eventually becoming the head coach.
Yeah.
You know, so this was waiting in the wings, which I think is a weird aspect here, but everything feels great right now. Like I mentioned, Mike Brown was De'Aaron Fox's guy. De'Aaron does really like Doug Christie too. Doug Christie's been around for as long as De'Aaron's been in Sacramento, obviously, whether that was on the broadcast or on, like I mentioned, Walton's staff and then now Mike Brown's staff. Now he's running the show. So De'Aaron does like him, and I think all the players like him. He's also extremely close with Domantas Sabonis. I mentioned Domas not really seeming like the biggest fan of Mike Brown. Doug Christie was the one assigned to Domantas Sabonis throughout the whole offseason. He's with him overseas. He's the one with going with him to USC to work out with DeMar DeRozan when they first make that signing. So I think that he has a good relationship there, and he is leaning into the idea of how much this team means to the city. You know, I don't know if you saw after a win, he takes them up to the top of the building and shows them where the base of the beam and how much this means to the city, or he's writing a message on the whiteboard before every single game. There's a Twitter check mark on their whiteboard because they're a verified team, you know? So a lot of like cliche, cheesy things, but they're 11-2. So it's easy for those things to feel great right now, trending in the right direction. Definitely just a vibe change. I think everybody has bought in. They're chasing after 50-50 balls. Defensively is where the biggest difference has been for this team, partially because I do think they're bought in. But the biggest strategic difference, I would say, is that Keon Ellis is playing a crazy amount of minutes, and what he's capable of doing, as you guys know, as somebody that was, you know, keeping your ears perked a little bit there, makes a big difference on both ends of the floor. I think he's been really effective for this team. And defensively, obviously what Doug Christie was known for 3-4 times, all defensive guy throughout his career. He's mucking up the game a lot. They'll run a 2-3 zone where they blitz at the top of it and have good guys to do that, switch things up a lot when it comes to defensive coverages. So I think that's where we've seen some of the biggest growths for this team in throughout this 11-2 stretch under Doug Christie here, or now I want to say it might be 11-3 now, actually, after that last loss to Denver, which was the start of their 6-game road trip here. But defensively is where this team has really turned it around. And it's all positive vibes right now under Doug Christie. But honestly, I don't think that we're going to learn that much about Christie as a coach until he goes through a little bit of adversity here, which has yet to take place, and can't complain about that really.
Well, so you start off with, like you said, they lose to the Lakers the day after the hire has happened, and then they've got 2 losses since then. And I guess the interesting thing from my perspective is like the new coach bump. We know that has been said to have existed in all sports in the past, and I looked at the Kings before the season, a team that was the 3 seed 2 years ago. They lost one. They won one fewer game last year, but in a loaded Western Conference, and they're still in a pretty packed conference now. But I wonder what about expectations. And now, is it a bit of a reset now that there's Christie in the building and this new movement, or is it back on schedule? Like, oh no, we want to be a playoff team. We're trying to win as many games as possible. Of not making the playoffs is a failure. Like, have expectations been adjusted at all with the turbulence that seemed to have happened at the beginning of the season?
Definitely not.
Okay.
I would say that that's the reason that Mike Brown was moved on from, because the expectations were remaining the same. Obviously, they weren't that committed to him in the first place. It's kind of a trend a little bit in Sacramento, obviously, of cutting ties very quickly when things aren't going well. And so I think expectations are still the same. And there's still an aspect of this roster needs to be better. They definitely expect them to make some sort of deal before the trade deadline. I think they're really close to getting John Collins, and that sounds like sort of the fallback plan if Cam Johnson doesn't end up working out, while Brooklyn obviously has a pretty high asking price there. So I think that they definitely need more wing forward depth on this team. It's really only Keegan Murray and Trey Lyles as your reliable wings forwards, and Trey Lyles can be a little bit night-to-night basis as well. So definitely still the same expectation that this Kings team needs to continue trending in the right direction, need to make the postseason. You added your biggest offseason signing in franchise history this offseason, a guy that's going to be an eventual Hall of Famer, top 30 in all-time points scored. He's totally rolling right now in DeRozan. So expectations definitely are still the same. Vivek does not seem like one to decide to, understand, maybe this year is a step back to take 2 steps forward next year. Not very much part of the Kings schedule.
Is that real? DeRozan's the biggest free agent signing in franchise history?
Yeah, I can't think of.
So Chris Webber was a trade, because that was
Chris Webber was a trade.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess that's really it.
Who else?
Okay.
The other one would probably be. I'm not even sure, dude. It really might be like Harrison Barnes.
Okay.
But that's re-signing.
Well, I guess my thought there was acquisition, not free agent acquisition. So I'm counting like Sabonis as part of the calculus there. So if it's just free agency, and that people don't realize that
chose to come here,
right. And I know we've talked about the Lakers in the past and rivals, but the Lakers have a top 10 list of biggest free agent signings because they get a lot of free agents to sign with them. And it was not crazy to say that Jalen Brunson, when it happened, not obviously with the benefit of hindsight, but when it happened, our host, one of our hosts, Jonathan Macri, said this might be the biggest signing in Knicks history. And we're like, wait, really? Like Jalen Brunson? And then you go down the list and second is Allen Houston, it ends up being that type of Melo's re-signed with the Knicks, but obviously he came to the Knicks in a trade. So I think it's interesting the way the DeRozan gets framed that way. And you said he's rolling at the moment. What's the biggest? Is it the new coach bump, or what is being done differently or is he just playing better that he's now rolling?
Yeah, I would guess that he's benefited a little bit from not practicing as much.
Okay.
At least
guy in his 30s, no longer practicing. Got it.
Yeah, it would make sense. But I would say that they've simplified their offense a lot. They're not running the same free-flowing motion offense, equal opportunity that they were under Mike Brown, which again, I think goes back to that was something that was well, we're going to need this for the postseason. Doug Christie's let's just focus on winning games right now. And so it's just more traditional pick and roll. It's just everybody getting into their own actions, less play calls. And I think that DeMar is obviously a guy that's just going to say, hey, let me get this one, and De'Aaron Fox on the other side, the other guy that was obviously right up there leading this team in scoring, I think can be a little bit more passive, a little bit more of a playmaker first and willing to let other guys get involved. And I think that's led to DeMar being the one that's running the show a little bit more when they're sharing the floor, at least. De'Aaron also has multiple broken fingers right now. He just he's had this left pinky since the second or third day of training camp that he's not going to get fixed all year long, or else it would require a surgery and he'd be out for the rest of the year. So he's just playing through that this year. He also just seemed to mess up his thumb in their very last game against Denver, which is why he's not expected to probably play tonight in New York, but we'll see what that ends up looking like. I haven't checked, admittedly, this morning what the injury report is looking like, but so that they've leaned into DeMar a little bit more on the offensive end, as De'Aaron has slowed down a little bit here, and DeRozan can still obviously get buckets with the best of them. You'll probably get a toe on the line for a 3 at some point during the game, and it'll end up being a 2. But when the toe's on the line, the shot seems a lot more likely to go in for DeMar for some reason. Of course, that mid-range assassin. So he's definitely helped a lot. And Domantas Sabonis as well. You can see that offensive change with him having a little fewer assists, but he's also shooting the ball extremely well. He's right up there 1 or 2 in 3-point percentage with Nikola Jokic this year. And he's not taking that many, but he's confident when he does it. I'm actually curious to see when teams start to close out a little bit harder, because you'll notice tonight, I'm sure he catches the ball and he lines up the laces before he even shoots it. Like, Sabonis has time out there. And I'm curious to see as that changes, if it affects his shooting. But that's been a big development for this team here as well. And it helps that Mike Brown never had a fully healthy Kings roster. Rookie Devin Carter was dealing with shoulder surgery when he first got drafted, was never available for Mike Brown. And so Doug Christie is just now getting like a fully healthy Kings roster. And then, of course, now De'Aaron is dealing with some things here as well. And there's always going to be little nicks and knacks throughout the course of a season, but getting healthy definitely helps. DeMar and Domas are doing so much for this team offensively. And for what it's worth, De'Aaron, while he slowed down, in this Warriors game that they just played a couple days ago, Andrew Wiggins is the one guarding De'Aaron Fox, and Buddy Hield is guarding DeMar DeRozan, so helps Debo a little bit when you get the lesser defender obviously on you there, but rolling offensively, but defensively is really where it feels like this team has made their leap. Before that Denver game, I haven't checked since, they were 3rd in defensive rating throughout this stretch with Doug Christie, which is totally ridiculous. And even in that Denver game, they were getting their butt kicked. It was second night of a back-to-back in Denver, which DeMar joked is like kind of a setup in the NBA. And they almost fight back from down, I want to say 25, to make it a 4-6 point game late there. Like, the fight with this team, it goes back to sort of their original Beam Team season. No matter how much they're down at the beginning of a game, you feel like they're going to fight enough to come back for a stretch. And that's what they've been doing so far.
Yeah, the top 10 in offense and defense over this stretch was the thing that stood out to me digging through the numbers. So it is like, the Keon Ellis impact is just in your face on Cleaning the Glass. The 3-man lineup of him, Sabonis, and Fox is pretty ridiculous. I'll pull up the number in a second, but look, this is the ebbs and flows of an 82 game season. Like you mentioned, De'Aaron Fox slowing down. I know he was averaging 30 for a little bit, and now he's averaging a measly 25 a game. But I think the more impressive thing is how many different guys are able to get their shots up. Like, nobody's shooting 20 shots a game on this team. You have 3 guys averaging at least 20 with Sabonis and Fox and DeRozan. And then you got Buddy Hield coming in, taking 14 shots a game, getting 17 points a game. They're an interesting team, and I think a team I wouldn't want to see in the playoffs. I know there's some teams at the top of the West that are that are contenders, and we'll see what happens come playoff time. But Kings team is like I said at the top, it's a fascinating team to try to evaluate. You mentioned some moves that they might make, whether it be John Collins or Cam Johnson. I'm going to put you on the spot. Make a prediction. What move do they make ahead of the February 6th deadline?
Yeah, I would say John Collins. I've described this front office, Monty McNair, Wes Wilcox, who kind of work in tandem here, as advantageous. I would say, like the DeMar DeRozan signing, it didn't cost you that much. The 2031 first round pick swap, we can talk about that down the line. We'll see what that ends up looking like. But they just like hopped on that one when a guy is at a low buying price, and that's why I think John Collins is obviously a way lower asking price than what Cam Johnson is, a guy that everybody seems to be bidding for right now. And I think there's been questions of Brooklyn likes Devin Carter and trying to include Devin Carter in the deal, or wanting unprotected firsts rather than obviously Kings preferring to put some protections on those picks. So I think it'll be John Collins. I think that my understanding is that they have like a John Collins deal practically ready and are just seeing, can we make it work with Cam? So I would guess John Collins. I'm curious to see what that eventual price point would be, because they don't have very many second round picks. Like, is it going to end up being a swap or what that may look like? But I would guess that they probably end up with a John Collins here within the next couple weeks. And Kevin Huerter's the one that's really gone by the wayside as Keon Ellis has gotten more minutes here. There's nights where Kevin Huerter's playing single-digit minutes. He's the obvious salary matching piece, and then Trey Lyles would be the other one in there as well, which then makes them have a little bit of a need for a backup center as well. I think they're going to be active in trying to look on the fringes for, if it's a Cam Johnson deal, can Day'Ron Sharpe be part of it, for example, or is not Mark Williams, Nick Richards, somebody to keep an eye on, or something like that, something small as well. But I could definitely, at this point, I would sort of kind of be surprised if John Collins didn't end up on the Kings by the trade deadline.
Interesting. Okay.
And I think he's a guy that makes a lot of sense. He's shooting the crap out of the ball this year. He's got great athleticism. If you run him in the second unit that they run, they let De'Aaron run the show with a handful of the younger guys. And that's where your pace really starts to return, because obviously DeMar plays a little bit slower. I think John Collins plays into that really well. Malik's good at throwing that lob as well, the pocket pass there. So I think he's a guy that makes a lot of sense for this team that really needs length, athleticism from a wing forward position that can also shoot the ball.
All right, so you heard it here first. John Collins to the Kings, reported by Brenden Nunes here on Knicks Film School. So you just put that out there, Shams. You don't even need to. You can credit us. We'd appreciate that if you wouldn't mind. I look forward to that trade going down and saying where people actually did hear it first. Brenden.
Yeah, hopefully I'm not premature, but a whole lot of smoke around it, specifically yesterday and the day before.
Okay, interesting. The Knicks obviously made a couple of all-in moves this offseason, so the potential moves that could be made, we'd love a Cam Johnson, but recognize they could be outbid for him. I'm gonna get your perspective now on what the Knicks did this offseason, and I guess we could talk a little bit about this game tonight if possible. But your first time here, we were talking about Fox for Julius Randle, and if that was in play, and the Halliburton of it all was a conversation too. The irony that there was once a time when Knicks fans were wondering if Tyrese Halliburton could be on the Knicks, and now he's one of the public enemies here in New York, even if he is a loser. I'm curious, Brenden, your thoughts to what the Knicks did, both the Bridges trade, both the Karl Anthony Towns trade, and where they stack up in the East. And it's a free space here. Be as honest as you'd like to be.
Yeah, I mean, I love Mikal Bridges. I think it's hard to not love Mikal Bridges, but at the same time, just like everybody else, it's like it's a whole lot. That's a whole lot to give up right there. But it's kind of the nature of the NBA right now, is that if you feel like you're that one piece away, then go all in. And then they somehow still manage to go and get Karl Anthony Towns, who is an interesting player when it comes to how he's talked about throughout the league. I had a lot of friends that are reporters that would just be like, I wouldn't touch Karl Anthony Towns with a yardstick, the soft label was on him. I also have a buddy that is the biggest Jimmy Butler fan. How there's
where it started.
People are fans
where
of
the soft label came from.
Players, right? Yeah, my best friend is a huge Jimmy Butler guy. So I kind of grew an affinity for that Timberwolves team when Jimmy was there. And Cat was like the soft one on the team, right? And at that point, it was like, oh, if Jimmy doesn't like you, that probably says more about you. And obviously, the tone has changed around Jimmy Butler as of late. But I've been really surprised to see how much he's embraced that city, and I would say like their personality, the being right up there and leading the league or close to, if Domantas Sabonis maybe wasn't around, in rebounds. I think buying in on the defensive end of the floor and having the perimeter containment in front of him makes that job so much easier, obviously, that I've been pleasantly surprised by Karl Anthony Towns, because this is a guy that, while he's going to talk his own shit about being the best shooting center of all time, like, and I think that was very valid for what it's worth, like, he got so much shit for that. And he's an extremely talented player. So it's great to see it all finally clicking. And I think the league is better when the Knicks are right there in competition, you know? So I was surprised by how well the Cat fit has worked. But even in the moment, I thought it was pretty obvious how that made more sense than Julius Randle. I've never been the biggest Julius Randle guy. I like his effort and hustle, but when it comes to just how do you make a team fit at times, and I know the hustle can be a little bit up and down at times, for sure.
A lot of Minnesota fans are wondering where that effort and hustle is these days.
Yeah, that's very fair, which is definitely part of it. But I would say that I've been impressed by him being Cat, really buying into sort of the, muck up the game and be a little bit of an ass at times, So I think I've been surprised how Cat's worked out. The McHale thing, I'm glad the shot's going down, because that was a weird whole aspect to this as well. But have the talented roster, and everybody on there. I loved Dante, for what it's worth, when he was in Sacramento. So
that's right. Yeah.
It is what it is there. But I think that it's very cool to me to see teams being willing to say, hey, this is our moment right now. We don't care if there's a powerhouse in Boston or wherever it may be. Like, this is our moment. And to see them go full all in on that, I think has been awesome. It's great for the league, and obviously it's paying off.
Yeah. I don't scroll Twitter as much as I used to. But it's probably a good thing for both of our mental health to not do so. But I saw a tweet go after the Knicks had 2 all-star starters named on Thursday night, and with Brunson and Cat being named, to start the all-star game for the East, it's the first time in like 50 years when Earl the Pearl Monroe and Walt Clyde Frazier were named starters together. And so the Knicks have their first 2 all-star starters for the first time in 50 years. They currently have the 6th best record in the league, the 3rd best record in the East. They're on pace for their highest win total since 2013, could potentially eclipse it and get their highest win total since 1997. They're 3rd in offense. They are like top 7 in net rating. They have like an efficient offense, which is what you want in today's league. Like they were like a good offensive team the last couple of years, but it was like winning the possession battle was how they do it with offensive rebounding.
Which I thought was really fun, by the way, for what it's worth, to be an inefficient off or like not make a high percentage of your shots.
15th in effective field goal percentage, but damn it, we're making as many chances as possible at the rim at this possession. Yeah, it wears the team down. We saw them in the Philly series last year, like get 17 offensive rebounds, and you can play defense for 24 seconds. Fine, you can do it for another 14 after Josh Hart comes flying out of nowhere because they're doubling Mitchell Robinson or Isaiah Hartenstein. Anyway, all that to say, they're having one of their best seasons ever, and yet we continue to hear like an emphasis on the head coach and he should be fired, and the mailbag questions and the comments we get that this team isn't ready to win a championship and this is one of the more miserable seasons I've watched. And I empathize with that person and those feelings. I just like the thief of joy that expectations can be sometimes. Like the Knicks are significantly better than the Kings, and it sounds like the Kings are having a significantly more fun season than the Knicks are if you compare how both fan bases are. And I understand, but you tell me, had Mike Brown lost the fan base too by the time it was over?
For sure. If I even decide to mention Mike Brown right now, I would get a lot of shit from Kings fans for sure. They were over it. The Keon Ellis stuff specifically. I think the tone of a lot of his press conferences, you probably saw the possession after possession after possession 25 times over, or calling out De'Aaron Fox after he fouls that 4-point shooter in Jaden Ivey, which is the last game that he ends up coaching. Mm-hmm. We came to find out that De'Aaron knew that, like, hey, I'm going to call you out a little bit publicly to media. And it's the Popovich sort of logic there that, hey, I'm chewing out Tim Duncan and he's listening to me. Everybody else has to fall in line. And he was following that a little bit, but didn't resonate with necessarily everybody in that locker room, and certainly not all of the fan base. So it's a fun season currently, but it's a weird ass year as in totality that only just became fun. And, things change really quick. They lost 6 in a row, then they won 7 straight. And it's like everything feels great, but I think it can change in the other direction just as quickly.
As far as this matchup is concerned, how have the Kings dealt with 5-out teams? I know we just watched them lose to Jokic. I should say the Nuggets, because they're more than just one player, but
he had like 30, 20, and 15.
Right. He's one of the top 2 for MVP this year. I love how that debate continues to go. When I had Andrew Schlecht of the who covers the Thunder on here, and he's like, we've done best player, best team forever, and why wouldn't it be SGA? And I keep going back to my thoughts on the debate or argument for MVP is like, it changes every day. Like, there's 2 right answers. There's allowed to be 2 right answers, and we pick one of them, and then we got the right answer.
And for what it's worth, I like Andrew, by the way. I don't know that we've always done best team, best player. Like, Tatum didn't win it.
That's right. Well, true. That's true. Tatum didn't win it. I guess that's where the Nuggets at the time. The Nuggets were like a 7 seed, so like to give the MVP to a 7 seed would be different. Right. But I mean, they're hovering around 4th now, so if that's why the NBA just Adam Silver pull your David. I realize I'm saying this around the Kings, but pull your David Stern strings and make sure that we get Thunder Nuggets in the 2nd round, because it would be greatly appreciated. Or at least in a round in the playoffs, because that's a series I'd be looking forward to. I recognize with the Kings, David Stern strings are a sensitive subject. Shout out to 2002, which would be the last time I bring that up around here. As far as this matchup is concerned, how have they done against 5-out teams?
Yeah, they've done okay. With not having a traditional rim protector, obviously with Domantas Sabonis being your back line, they have a lot of emphasis on protecting the paint as a team, whether that means, sometimes you're going to see Malik Monk be the low man at times, just in how the possession happens to play out. And then all of a sudden he's responsible for protecting the rim, and then rotations come on the backside a little bit. So it seems like those teams that space really well, whether that's 5-out or whatever it may be, and have an elite playmaker that really can pick you apart. Like Chris Paul gave them hell earlier this year. Because he just totally picked apart their defense as they were trying to rotate. So 3-point defense, I think, because of their emphasis on protecting the rim as a team, is something that they've struggled with throughout a lot of this year. They're giving up the 3rd highest 3-point percentage so far throughout the course of this season. And so that's where their struggles have been a little bit. And you're seeing it slight changes under Doug Christie. Like I mentioned, they're blitzing a little bit more. You're going to see a little bit more zone maybe as those possessions start to happen a little bit here. But for the most part, those are kind of the teams that have given them a little bit of struggles, because like I said, as a team, they really focus on protecting the rim without a traditional rim protector as their 5-man. And therefore you leave shooters a little bit. You're stuck in rotations, and there's certain guys that do that better than others. Obviously, why Keon Ellis has been a big part of this, but DeMar DeRozan, for as much as he can put the ball in the basket, is a really, really bad off-ball defender, as he has been for a long time. So their 3-point defense, I would say, is where things start to get a little bit concerning at times.
Yeah. The other thing I noticed during this stretch, the since Doug Christie stretch, they just don't turn the ball over. First in turnover percentage, the lowest turnover percentage, I should say, in the league over this stretch. And the Knicks, a lot of criticism has been made of them playing this heavy drop. So part of the reason Cat has been able to be effective defensively is the defensive rebounding Like, you get one shot at the brim and in your possessions when he's on the floor. He is grabbing that rebound. And when he's been out, yeah, you have a better rim protector or just a better defensive center in Precious Achiuwa, who can either be part of a switch everything defense or just play higher on the drop. But then you're really just depending on Josh Hart to be a rebounder, and teams' offensive rebound percentage goes up. So the benefit of having Cat and why they're 6 points better with him defensively is just that you're getting one chance at the possession. At the same time, that first shot may be on a very deep drop that Karl-Anthony Towns is playing, which would worry me today against DeRozan. And recently they started playing a bit more aggressive too, against the Hawks, against the Nets. They forced a ton of turnovers. They're switching a bit more. They're playing a bit closer to the level. I wonder if we see this game, the Knicks against a team that's a bit more conservative with the ball. I should say just safer with the ball in the Kings. And I mean, you tell me if the numbers are matching it on the court, that this team just doesn't turn the ball over, and they'll make a team that's a bit more aggressive pay.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that's part of like the simplifying the offense that I mentioned earlier. There's just less passes on a possession in general. There's not as many of these dribble handoffs, everybody touching it. That was part of what I think was a little bit tough with Keon Ellis, is that he has the ball in his hands for a little too long. He might not make the right decision, slows down the offensive pace, specifically when they're trying to run that free-flowing scheme under Mike Brown. So being a little bit more traditional, just pick and roll, I think simplifies that. Malik Monk's great at making that pocket pass to Domantas Sabonis. DeMar DeRozan isn't going to overly force it. De'Aaron Fox is a really good passer as well, I would say. So they have the right guys that are doing that, and simplified in the aspect of they're the only ones really doing it out there. So I think that's definitely helped. And to your point with the drop, I'm curious how much you sit in that, because like obviously DeMar DeRozan can just totally kill you there. De'Aaron Fox has a similar spot on the floor, just on the other side, right around that elbow mark, where he can do damage as well. So I think that it's a fine line though, because you don't want to, just be taking a bunch of twos while the other side's checking up threes. So makes it a little bit tough at times. Not that the Knicks are a team that like is just chucking necessarily or anything like that.
Right.
But I think just the calculus in general of dealing with the modern NBA and a Kings team that shoots a lot of twos, obviously DeMar leading the league in how many middies that he takes. But hey, it's efficient. They knock him down, and that's what matters. So I think definitely fewer turnovers, but on the other end, forcing more as well. And being one of the better offensive teams in transition, but also defensive teams in transition has been really helpful for this team. And my ears perk up a little bit too when you talk about how good defensive rebounding the Knicks have been, because that's been one of the Kings' strengths as well during this stretch. Obviously, Domantas Sabonis is great at that. Keegan Murray, as much as he struggled offensively, has taken a huge leap as a rebounder throughout the course of this season. So it'll be interesting to see which team. I feel like this going into a lot of nights, but the possession game always feels extremely important, and this feels like one of those even more so, where rebounds and turnovers could play a big part.
So this matchup actually helped me discover something. So I was looking at what the Kings are in 3-point percentage since that stretch that you talked about. So I start from the day Christie took over, which was the 28th of December. And when you sorted on NBA.com, the Kings in 3-point percentage are 14th. They're middle league average, we'll call that. And the Knicks, for most of the season, were anywhere from 1, 2, or 3 in 3-point percentage. And it had been a while since I had checked it. And I knew it was dropping. Like, they're now 7th in the NBA in 3-point percentage. But in sorting that stretch, I noticed that since December 28th, the Knicks are 27th in 3-point percentage, which I knew they were cold. I did know that they had just started playing better teams. Like the month of December was against a different schedule. A minutes conversation can be had about the fact that they're playing a ton of minutes. Their starting five is playing a ton of minutes. They've been thankfully healthy, but like Anunoby has looked exhausted. His 3-point percentage went from 40 to around 34% on the season. Josh Hart was around 40. He's down at 36. Jalen Brunson went through a cold streak. So look, the most interesting thing for me as far as this matchup is concerned is, like I said, The Knicks don't ever practice because of their schedule unless they have multiple days off. They have not played since Tuesday. So this is a team that has practiced, that may have gotten some rest, some days off as well. I think this will be a very well-prepared Knicks team coming into this game, especially against a team that might not have De'Aaron Fox. I like the Knicks' chances here, but I recognize that them playing a very conservative drop that they like to do may lead to, whether DeMar eats him up in the mid-range, or this is a game where Malik Monk hits 5 threes. Or, by the way, Doug McDermott, is he going to play? And should I be worried about 5, 6 threes? I know he hit a bunch of threes against the Nuggets the other night.
Yeah, 5 of 7 in that fourth quarter and really brought them back in that one. I don't know, but if it were me, I think I'd play Doug McDermott over Kevin Huerter right now. Kevin Huerter not really doing much for this team, and there's the complication of, are you going to give this guy a DNP-CD when everybody knows he's the trade piece and whatever that may factor in? But we're already there. We're already there. We're already in too deep in those conversations.
Yeah.
He's playing 8 minutes in some of these games. I would go to Doug McDermott early in this game and just see if he can give you a little bit of a burst.
Yeah, it's one of those things where his value's been established.
Right.
So you don't want him. We had this a couple years ago with Cam Reddish, where his value was established. You don't want him playing and potentially getting hurt. Obviously they traded him for Josh Hart. Turned out to be one of the best trades in Knicks history. But I can understand that as well. Okay, we have some people watching live. If we can get some questions in before you get out of here. The first question will be from Ben Kim Gervey. Let's start here. Question probably get to before going to questions, but guess what? We didn't. What was going on between Brown and the team that led to the big turn? Oh, you know what? We did get to this question. So I'm actually going to pull up Ben Kim Gervey's other question about Sabonis. So are they orienting towards building around Sabonis? This is towards, is it a Sabonis team? Is it a Fox team?
Right.
Who is the centerpiece?
Yeah, I think that part of moving on from Mike Brown, when you know that that's a guy that De'Aaron Fox wants around, and De'Aaron Fox just put pressure on you of, hey, what direction are we heading in if I'm going to stick around after this offseason, makes me think that the writing's probably on the wall for De'Aaron Fox at this point. And again, I think he really likes Doug Christie. He likes a lot of the players on this roster as well. And he's been vocal about, I'd rather win in Sacramento. But at some point, I think that you got to do what's best for you. And I would bet that De'Aaron's at the point where, unless you prove me otherwise, and this goes, that there really is some notable run in the postseason, whatever that may mean, of getting into the second round, maybe, that the writing's probably on the wall, like I'm saying. So I think that you're going to be forced to pivot to a Sabonis team, or maybe it's technically like a DeRozan, Sabonis, Malik team between the three of them, I guess. There's a lot of optimism among Kings fans of, if De'Aaron ends up leaving, that Malik Monk has more than what he's shown, that if he was given more opportunity, for example, that he could continue to take another step. And he's still fairly young at 26 as well, So I get the optimism, but there's a reason that Fox is in the spot that he's in and Malik's the spot that he's in. Malik is a lot more inconsistent throughout the course of his career. But it does feel like we're getting to a point where this offseason, it's going to be, say it's Reed Shepherd, Tari Eason, and Steven Adams all of a sudden. And these are the guys. And you're talking about a Reed Shepherd, Malik Monk, DeMar DeRozan, Keegan Murray, Domantas Sabonis, or maybe it's Stephon Castle, for example, as he's been linked to San Antonio. Which, by the way, the fact that San Antonio is the team he's linked to, and De'Aaron was very clear this offseason how much he appreciated the continuity that was with this team of sticking around, having the same head coach, something that he's not had very much throughout his NBA career. He was very clear this offseason how much he appreciated that. And then they make this change, and the team that he's reportedly interested in is the San Antonio Spurs, by the way, who are like the pillar of consistency.
Yeah.
I think makes a lot of sense, I guess I would say. So I still think that we are moving towards what's likely going to be a breakup this offseason. But you never know. Things could change. I think he would prefer to get it done in Sacramento. It's just his level of belief and trust in this front office and organization as a whole to continue to trend upwards. And I wouldn't blame him if he's not the most optimistic about that, given the history of this team and then making this change mid-season, which has worked so far. But again, I don't think you learn a lot about a coach until they go through some tumultuous times, and we haven't seen that yet with Christie. So yeah, I think the writing's on the wall, but a notable run this offseason or this season and specifically postseason, I think could save some of that.
So J Rose 712 did ask if the Kings were to trade Fox, who would they look to get in exchange? And you're saying, I mean, I guess my question toward this question is, how much does it matter to the player they get back, or would they look more so to be getting picks, like assets in that direction?
I think both, but I think that you want like some sort of key player in it as well to, as much as I think that if you're moving in that direction, a full reset makes sense. It pains me a little bit that I was saying they should reset years ago. And then you're seeing OKC obviously went through their whole thing, but like Houston even, and how quick that they've managed to turn around, just like fully tearing it down, resetting, doing it the right way works. In my mind, even if
Orlando,
it's a process.
Yeah.
Orlando's a great one. Cleveland has kind of done that. So I think it works, and we've yet to see this team really do that. And that's where my frustration is. But I think given that history, I don't expect them to do that again. I think that they'd still want to remain competitive post Fox trade. And you want to have like a key piece as part of that you feel like, all right, this is the direction that we're moving in. Pie in the sky here, but you're hoping to get your SGA when you move on from your Paul George,
Yeah.
And so I don't know that that's the most reasonable thing, obviously, specifically the SGA one, obviously.
Right. That's an unprecedented thing. But I hear what you're saying, that even if you just, when you're moving on from Kevin Durant, you get your Mikal Bridges, that you can then turn into a bunch of picks.
It wouldn't surprise me if even they didn't want to go young. Like when the Raptors or the Spurs traded Kawhi Leonard for DeMar DeRozan. Like if there was a guy like that, which obviously that specific guy's already on this team, but more of a win now player, it wouldn't surprise me if they elected to go in that direction as well, because I would think that they still want to remain competitive, but feel like, excuse me, been sick recently. Domantas Sabonis, DeMar DeRozan, Malik Monk can remain you competitive. And then maybe you have like one younger piece and you can say that your future core is Devin Carter, Keegan Murray, and Reed Shepherd.
Yeah. But like the Knicks literally just traded Julius Randle and Dante to a team that wanted to still win now.
Right.
But obviously they were ready to move on from Karl-Anthony Towns. So that is, as a Knicks fan, that's something to pay attention to this summer. I will say it is interesting the Knicks aren't going to be involved in the sweepstakes for De'Aaron Fox at all after years of who we going to get. Who we going to get is probably over. So we'll see what happens. Last question. This is Knicks related, I guess. From LJ Horowitz, if the Kings do make a trade for Cam Johnson, is Keon Ellis available?
I'm going to go no. I think he's been a big part of their turnaround. That's not to say that I don't think he could be part of like a Cam Johnson trade. But I think even from both sides' perspective, it makes more sense that if you're really trying to throw in another piece, that like Devin Carter is the one that's part of that conversation. For example, Keon doesn't have the most years remaining to make sense for a team like Brooklyn, obviously, unless they were maybe trying to reroute him. But I would guess that, if you're trying to include some pieces in a deal, you also want to maintain the guys that are extremely cost effective right now and making a big impact on your team. So definitely don't expect them to move on from Keon Ellis, who's been a big part of this turnaround.
You heard it here first, Knicks fans. Keon Ellis, not the guy that they're going to potentially acquire.
I don't blame you guys. If I would have seen the same thing going on, I'd be like, hey, this guy needs to go somewhere.
Shout out to Jeremy Cohen, our capologist brain here at Knicks Film School. His first PowerPoint that he went through of like, this is where the Knicks should be focused on. It was Keon Ellis. And we were like, oh, yes, absolutely. And then the Kings kept losing. And then all the Fox stuff started. And we were like, oh, they might actually tear it down. He might be available. Fired Mike Brown, 10 and 2 cents. And the rest is history. So, we'll see what the Knicks end up doing. The thing they're going to do tonight is play the Sacramento Kings, though, at Madison Square Garden. And I obviously hope that the Kings lose, but I appreciate, Brenden, you for coming down to Knicks Film School and talking about this matchup. Red Sox hat and all. I have no beef with the Red Sox, so I don't care. But to the Yankee fan that had to watch it, I don't even apologize. It just, you had to watch it.
I'm a
Brenden,
shit stirrer, man. You know, I like to have some fun.
Been there. Believe me, been
there.
Sure. Shout out to every Philly pregame pod I've had to do, which may end up being my last one because nobody wants to do a pregame pod with me anymore. Brenden, before you get out of here, let the fine folks at home know where they can find you and all of your work.
Yeah, appreciate you having me, Andrew. Sorry for being a little bit behind on the live here.
No worries.
It is at Brenden Nunes NBA on socials, and all the written work is over at sactownsports.com. So check it out while they're still winning. We'll see how long this lasts, you know.
As somebody who recognizes the boost that your content gets for a winning team, yes, I hope for your sake, outside of tonight, that the Kings keep winning, so that way your work does well. Believe me, this January where the Knicks are 6-6 has been very up and down for us as well. Meanwhile, the December where they lost once, was very prosperous. So we're hoping for something like that again in the not too distant future. Brenden, as always, it's good to see you. Good luck with the A's. I know you're not an A's fan, but I hope you enjoy a summer of baseball in Sacramento this upcoming summer. So it's good to see you and best of luck. And thank you to everybody for tuning in to another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. If you dug it, please head over to iTunes, drop a 5-star rating and a review. I will be back on Monday again at noon to preview another Knicks matchup, that time against the Memphis Grizzlies. Don't forget, this next Saturday, February 1st, will be our 1-year anniversary watch party where the Knicks will take on the Los Angeles Lakers. It's good to have someone covers the Kings here. The hated Los Angeles Lakers. LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and Bronny James will make their first trip to MSG this season. And we will be doing our 1-year anniversary watch party at T-Squared Social. So be there or be T-Squared. We'd love to have you there. Until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the game tonight. Check out the post game, and I'll speak with you soon. Peace.